The moment the flight attendant's foot connected with Gloria's frail but dignified frame, a collective gasp echoed through the cabin. The tension, already thick, exploded into something undeniable, an ugly, shocking scene of blatant disrespect. Gloria staggered but didn't fall. Instead, she straightened, her eyes burning with quiet fury, with a lifetime of battles fought with grace and resilience. Passengers, frozen in disbelief, snapped out of their silence. Murmurs of outrage spread like wildfire, and within moments, phones were raised, cameras rolling. Someone shouted, "You can't do that!" Another demanded, "What is wrong with you?" But the damage had already been done. Karen, the flight attendant, scoffed, dismissing the collective disapproval with a roll of her eyes, utterly unaware that her career was disintegrating by the second. Then, just as Karen turned away, an authoritative voice rang out from the first-class cabin. "Do you have any idea who this woman is?" The entire plane fell silent. Gloria took a slow breath, adjusting the pearls around her neck. The moment she had been forced to endure would not define her, but it would define Karen's fate. But before we dive deeper into this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you love stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss out. Miss Gloria, an elegant 82-year-old black woman, carefully made her way through the bustling terminal at Los Angeles International Airport. The airport, alive with the hurried footsteps of travelers, seemed to fade into the background as she stood there, poised and graceful. Dressed in a dark green dress that complemented her soft, dignified style, and adorned with a simple strand of pearls around her neck, Gloria exuded an aura of quiet strength. Her soft gray curls, tucked neatly under a small, tasteful hat, gave her a timeless look. Despite the weight of the years, there was a light in her eyes, an excitement that had been building for weeks. This flight from Los Angeles to Chicago was unlike any other for Gloria. It had been years since she had flown, and this was her first time traveling alone. Her son, Thomas, CEO of a major airline, had insisted on booking her this first-class seat for her comfort. She had been hesitant at first, not wanting to impose on his success or use his influence for something as simple as a flight. But Thomas, always caring, had been firm. "Mom, you deserve the best. Let me take care of this," he had said. And so, here she was. Though she appreciated the comfort, Gloria remained determined to keep her independence. The years had taught her to move through the world with grace and dignity, no matter the circumstances. She had worked hard her entire life, raising her children and ensuring they had opportunities she herself never did. She had always taught them to stand tall, to face adversity with poise, and most of all, to never let others define their worth. Today, as she stepped through the gates of the airline, Gloria held on to that sense of self, quietly confident but deeply aware of the journey ahead. Gloria's first steps onto the plane were met with the kind of gaze she had become all too familiar with over the years. Subtle, dismissive glances from those who thought her presence didn't belong. She had encountered this kind of silent judgment her whole life, the kind that came from both strangers and those who thought they were above her. In those moments, she often felt like a ghost in a world that didn't care to see her. But Gloria had learned long ago not to shrink from those looks. She had learned to hold her head high, to ignore the whispers, and to move forward with a quiet strength. Her modest outfit, though impeccable, stood in stark contrast to the flashier, wealthier passengers around her. A few of them cast sidelong glances as she made her way down the narrow aisle, offering only brief, dismissive glances as she passed. She didn't mind. These stares, the whispers, the silent judgments, she had lived with them for as long as she could remember. What mattered to her was not how others saw her, but how she saw herself. And today, Gloria was determined to focus on the joy awaiting her at her destination, the chance to finally meet her grandchildren. She had been planning this trip for months, and the idea of holding her great-grandchildren, hearing their laughter and sharing stories from her own life brought a warmth to her chest. Gloria had worked hard to create a life full of love and meaning, and this trip was a small indulgence she was allowing herself. She smiled softly, sinking into the plush seat as she settled in for the journey. The stares and murmurs would fade into nothingness soon enough. What mattered was the moment ahead of her, the one that would be filled with family and the joy of reunion. As she settled in, she took a deep breath, knowing that the journey ahead wasn't just a physical one, but an emotional one too, a reminder of everything she had overcome, and everything still yet to come. As Gloria approaches the boarding gate, she feels a brief flutter of nerves, but she pushes it aside. She focuses on the sound of her heels clicking on the polished floor, the steady rhythm of her steps reminding her that she is in control. She hands her boarding pass to the lead flight attendant, Karen, who scans it without meeting her eyes. Gloria notices the brief hesitation in Karen's movements, the way her eyes flick over the ticket before looking back at her with a forced smile. It's subtle, but Gloria senses the judgment in the brief, insincere expression. She's been through this before. Subtle dismissals from strangers who make snap judgments about her based on her appearance. She brushes the feeling off, knowing that it's not worth her energy. Gloria gives a soft smile back, trying to remain polite, though she knows that the encounter is unlikely to be a warm one. She continues walking towards her seat, the momentary discomfort lingering like a shadow. As she moves through the cabin, she becomes more aware of the eyes following her. A few passengers glance at her with mild curiosity, their stares lingering just a little longer than necessary. They look her up and down, perhaps wondering why someone like her would be on this flight. Gloria feels the weight of their gaze, but she refuses to let it slow her down. She keeps her back straight, her head held high, and her gaze fixed ahead. There is no room for doubt in her mind. She belongs here just as much as anyone else. When she reaches her seat, number 2A, Gloria pauses for a moment, taking in the plush surroundings of the first-class cabin. She has never flown first class before, and the luxurious surroundings are a bit overwhelming. The leather seats, the soft lighting, the attention to detail, all of it feels like a dream. But despite the lavishness of the surroundings, Gloria feels the sting of those looks, the whispers that follow her as she settles into the seat. She places her small leather handbag carefully by her feet, adjusting it just so. Gloria reminds herself of why she is here. This trip is for her family, for the joy of being with her grandchildren. The whispers of the passengers, the quiet judgment, will not define this moment for her. She smiles softly, closing her eyes for a brief moment, and lets the excitement of seeing her family fill her heart. She won't let anything else get in the way. As Gloria settles into her seat 2A, she takes a moment to adjust the soft leather armrests and smooth the fabric of her dress. She feels the small tremor in her hands, a reminder of the years she has lived and the challenges she has faced. Her small carry-on bag, a practical yet sentimental possession, rests at her side. She knows she should stow it overhead to free up space for the rest of the passengers, but her hands tremble a little more than usual as she reaches for the compartment above. The slight hesitation doesn't go unnoticed. She hears the shuffle of feet behind her, the low murmurs of passengers who are eager to settle into their own seats. The air feels heavier with impatience, and Gloria can sense the subtle eyes on her. She takes a deep breath, trying to steady her hands. The delicate tug of the overhead compartment feels like a mountain to climb, but she presses on. Before she can fully manage the task, Karen, the lead flight attendant, steps forward. Gloria's heart sinks as she notices the unmistakable look of irritation on Karen's face. The flight attendant's gaze lingers on her, as if Gloria's minor delay is somehow an inconvenience to the entire plane. With an exaggerated sigh, Karen crosses her arms, letting the sound of her exasperation fill the cabin. The passengers behind Gloria shuffle impatiently in their seats, their eyes flitting from Gloria to the overhead compartment. Gloria can feel the weight of their collective gaze pressing down on her. She knows she's holding up the line, but she's trying her best. It's a moment that feels far too long, and she wishes she could just disappear into the seat. But instead, she focuses on the task at hand, keeping her composure. Just as she manages to lift the bag, a man seated nearby stands up and smiles kindly. "I've got it, ma'am," he says gently, his voice warm and reassuring. With ease, he places the bag into the overhead compartment, avoiding the frustration that Karen seems so eager to express. Gloria offers him a grateful smile, her heart lifting for a moment, but as she settles back into her seat, she hears Karen's voice again, this time sharp and pointed, her tone carrying an unmistakable edge. "Let's not hold up the line," Karen says, loud enough for several passengers to hear. Her words are clipped, and Gloria can feel the sharpness of the remark lingering in the air. It's not just a comment on the situation. It's a judgment of her presence, of her being in the way. Gloria's hands rest lightly on her lap, and she forces herself not to flinch at Karen's words. She can feel the heat rising in her chest, a simmering frustration threatening to bubble over. But she takes another deep breath, determined not to let this moment define her. The man who helped her stow the bag returns to his seat, offering a polite nod. Gloria nods back, thankful for his kindness, but the tension in the air doesn't dissipate. Karen moves down the aisle with a brisk step, and Gloria watches her retreating figure. Her thoughts swirl for a moment. This isn't just about a bag or a delayed boarding process. It's something deeper, something that cuts to the heart of how Gloria has always been treated. She isn't a young, sleek passenger in a tailored suit. She doesn't fit the narrow mold that society seems to expect. But Gloria is resilient. She has weathered so many storms over the years, endured countless moments like this, and yet, here she is. Her heart aches with the weight of the invisible barrier that keeps her from belonging in spaces like this, but she won't let it shake her. She won't let Karen's judgment derail her journey. As the plane prepares to take off, Gloria closes her eyes for a moment, the quiet hum of the engines soothing her nerves. The discomfort of the situation still lingers, but Gloria reminds herself why she's on this flight. Her grandchildren, the joy of seeing them after so many years, the love that will welcome her when she steps off the plane. That thought, that light at the end of the journey, is what she holds on to as the plane begins to ascend. It's the one thing that keeps her grounded, no matter how much the world around her tries to pull her down. As the flight progresses, Gloria settles into her seat, her fingers tracing the edges of the armrests as the plane begins to climb higher into the sky. The feeling of the smooth leather seat beneath her is comforting. But her mind starts to wander. She adjusts her position, trying to make herself more comfortable, and notices that her seatbelt feels a bit tight. It's one of those small details that might seem insignificant to others, but for Gloria, it's important to follow the rules and ensure her safety. She presses the flight attendant call button, her heart racing a little at the thought of asking for help. She knows it's a small request, something that anyone else might ask without hesitation, but in the back of her mind, she worries about how it will be received. The last thing she wants is to cause any more trouble, to attract any more unwelcome attention. But she's old, and the seatbelt doesn't seem to fit right. It's as simple as that. A few moments later, Karen approaches, her heels clicking sharply against the aisle floor. She stands before Gloria's seat, arms crossed, her face barely concealing the annoyance she feels. "What is it now?" Karen asks, her voice colder than necessary. Gloria lifts her gaze, offering a soft smile. "I believe my seatbelt is stuck," she says gently, her voice calm but slightly shaky. "Would you mind helping me, dear?" Karen leans in, inspecting the seatbelt with an exaggerated sigh, her eyes narrowing as she fiddles with the buckle. "Just pull harder," she mutters dismissively, barely giving Gloria a second glance. Gloria feels the sting of Karen's impatience, but she doesn't let it show. She nods politely and says, "Thank you, dear," even though the situation leaves her feeling small. She knows she's not causing any trouble. She simply needs help. But the way Karen speaks to her, like her request is a burden, makes her feel as though she's being unreasonable. "Special requests already?" Karen mutters under her breath, loud enough for Gloria to hear. There's a trace of irritation in her voice, as though Gloria's simple need for assistance is somehow out of place, somehow beneath the standards of the flight. Karen's words cut through the air like a blade, and Gloria feels her heart tighten in her chest. It's the kind of comment that stirs something deep inside her. A familiar ache, one that she's learned to ignore over the years, but one that never really fades. Gloria tries to push the discomfort aside, focusing instead on the anticipation of seeing her grandchildren. She tries to remind herself that she's a strong woman, one who's faced much worse than a rude flight attendant. But it's hard to shake the feeling that Karen sees her as less than the others on this flight, that her presence here doesn't belong. It's hard to ignore the weight of the judgment in Karen's eyes, the way she looks at Gloria like she's just another inconvenience to deal with. For a brief moment, Gloria contemplates saying something, standing up for herself, asserting that she deserves more respect. But she doesn't. Instead, she smiles softly, a gesture of grace that she's perfected over the years. It's a smile that hides the sting of the moment, the quiet humiliation that settles deep in her chest. As Karen walks away, Gloria exhales slowly, trying to steady her emotions. She glances around the cabin, her eyes meeting the gaze of a few nearby passengers. Some are focused on their own tasks, others have their heads turned, watching the interaction unfold with mild curiosity. She can feel their eyes on her, some lingering longer than necessary, as if they're trying to understand why Karen had been so sharp with her. Gloria holds her head high, her back straight, determined not to let this incident define her. She looks out the window, watching the endless expanse of blue sky as the plane climbs higher. The view outside, so vast and open, seems to remind her of the world beyond these walls, a world that's filled with possibility and beauty. She thinks of her grandchildren, the joy they'll bring when they see her, and the love they'll share. That, she knows, is what truly matters. The hurt that Karen's words have caused begins to fade, replaced by the warmth of her memories and the hope for what's to come. Gloria won't let this brief moment of discomfort take away the happiness she feels about the future. She knows that there will always be people who try to make her feel small, who will judge her based on the color of her skin or her age. But Gloria has lived through enough to know that those people don't define her. She defines herself through the strength of her heart, her resilience, and her unwavering belief that kindness is more powerful than judgment. As the plane continues its ascent, Gloria settles back into her seat, closing her eyes for a moment, letting the hum of the engines soothe her. She is not just a passenger on this flight. She is a woman with a life full of stories, full of love and strength. And no one, not even Karen, can take that away from her. As the flight continues, Gloria sits back in her seat, trying to relax and focus on the reason for her journey, the joy of seeing her grandchildren for the first time in years. However, the discomfort she feels from Karen's previous behavior lingers, casting a shadow over her otherwise happy anticipation. Her throat feels dry, and she remembers that she needs to take her medication, which she's been careful to keep in her small handbag. She hesitates for a moment, knowing that she might need to interact with Karen again. She presses the call button, a slight knot tightening in her stomach. She doesn't want to inconvenience anyone further, but her health comes first. The last thing she wants is to be dismissed again, but she can't ignore her need. A few minutes later, Karen approaches, moving quickly down the aisle with the usual sharp clicking of her heels. Gloria can already feel the edge in Karen's presence before she even speaks. When Karen stops at her row, she doesn't even bother to hide her frustration. "Yes, ma'am?" Karen asks, her voice more clipped than before, her gaze sharp and unwelcoming. "Excuse me, dear. I need a small cup of water to take my medication. It won't take long, I promise," Gloria says softly, her voice steady despite the unease bubbling within her. Karen rolls her eyes, the gesture exaggerated and completely visible to the nearby passengers. She lets out a loud sigh, clearly irritated. "Water service will start when we're at cruising altitude," Karen responds curtly. "You'll have to wait." Gloria is taken aback by the harshness in Karen's tone. It wasn't just the words, it was the dismissive, almost scornful way they were delivered. For a moment, Gloria's mind races with 1,000 thoughts, none of them kind. But she refuses to react. She won't let herself sink to that level. She's faced worse, much worse, in her life. What stings the most is the way Karen seems to believe that Gloria's request is somehow an inconvenience, an intrusion on her world. "Of course," Gloria replies calmly, her voice quiet but firm as she gently nods her head. "Thank you, dear." She turns her gaze toward the window, trying to push the discomfort aside. But the tension in the air is undeniable. It's not just about the water anymore. It's the way Karen treats her, as if her presence is an imposition. And Gloria knows. She can feel the subtle weight of the eyes of the other passengers on her. She doesn't turn to look, but she senses it. The shifting of bodies, the quiet murmurs, the slight glances exchanged among those nearby. People are noticing, and they are uncomfortable too. A few passengers exchange looks. some shaking their heads ever so slightly, others shifting in their seats as if caught in an awkward moment they don't quite know how to address. One woman, seated in the row directly across the aisle, leans over to her companion and whispers just loud enough for Gloria to hear, "That was uncalled for." Another passenger, a man sitting a few rows behind Gloria, glances forward and gives a slight nod of disapproval, his expression one of disbelief. Gloria can't help but feel a ripple of relief, but it's fleeting. She doesn't want the attention, she didn't ask for it. And as the tension rises, she wonders if any of it will matter. As much as she appreciates the support, there's something deeper gnawing at her. This wasn't just about a cup of water. It was about being made to feel small, about the subtle yet harsh judgment she faces every day, now here, of all places, at 300 feet. The flight continues, but Gloria can feel Karen's presence like a shadow, always just out of sight, but always there. Each time Karen passes, her gaze lingers just a moment too long on Gloria, her expression hardening, as if Gloria is some problem she's waiting to deal with. The subtle hostility begins to grow like a building storm, and Gloria's unease only deepens with each passing minute. She tries to focus on the view outside, the endless stretch of blue sky and the white clouds that look so serene from this height. The world outside the window seems so peaceful, so distant from the storm brewing in the cabin. But inside, the discomfort lingers. Her sense of being unwelcome continues to echo in the pit of her stomach, leaving a taste of bitterness in her mouth. She adjusts in her seat again, trying to push all of it aside, trying to find peace. She's on this flight for a reason. To be with her family, to hold her grandchildren, to share a part of her life with them that she has worked so hard to give. No one, especially not a flight attendant, can take that from her. Gloria won't let it ruin this moment. She's determined to stay focused on her purpose no matter how many small slights she faces. But as the plane climbs higher and Karen's behavior becomes increasingly hostile, the tension in the cabin grows thicker, almost tangible. Gloria knows that the moment will come when she can't ignore it any longer. The question now is whether she will let the sting of this treatment define her, or whether she will rise above it, as she's done so many times before. Gloria presses the call button again, this time with a bit more hesitation. She knows it's a small request, a simple cup of water, but the tension in the air makes it feel like a much bigger deal. Her throat is dry, and her need for water to take her medication is becoming more urgent. The flight attendants have already ignored her polite request once, but this time she isn't going to let it go. When Karen finally approaches, her steps are deliberate, her face set in a cold, practiced expression. Gloria's heart sinks as she sees her, but she remains composed, hoping that this time will be different. However, as Karen leans over to hand her the cup, she slams it onto Gloria's tray table with such force that the glass rattles. The water splashes slightly, and Gloria instinctively pulls her hands back to avoid the mess. "Here you go," Karen mutters curtly, her voice dripping with disdain, before turning sharply and walking away. The impact of the gesture is undeniable. The passengers around them notice, and a low murmur begins to spread through the cabin. Gloria can feel the shift in the air, the uncomfortable quiet that has descended over the group. The way Karen treated her, the force with which the cup was placed in front of her, it was all too much. But Gloria refuses to let it show. She takes a steadying breath, trying to maintain her calm demeanor as she adjusts the cup on her tray. But the whispers are growing. Gloria doesn't need to look around to know that people are talking about her, judging the situation. She's no stranger to these moments, the subtle glances, the judgments that come without words. It's a familiar ache, one she's learned to ignore, but it still cuts deep. The feeling of being other, of being unworthy of simple kindness, never gets easier. Just as Gloria begins to focus again on her medication, a soft voice cuts through the murmur of the cabin. "Here, you can have my water," a young girl from across the aisle says, holding out a half-empty bottle of water with a look of genuine kindness in her eyes. She's no older than 9, her innocence apparent in her open gesture. Gloria is momentarily stunned. She smiles warmly, taking the water from the girl with a gentle nod. "Thank you, sweetheart," Gloria says, her voice soft but filled with gratitude. The girl's parents, seated beside her, give Gloria an encouraging smile, their support obvious despite the uncomfortable tension in the cabin. The small act of kindness doesn't go unnoticed. It seems to stir something in the other passengers, a shift in the atmosphere that's subtle but undeniable. The whispers begin to slow, and some passengers exchange glances, their eyes softening with empathy. Others nod slightly, as if acknowledging that what has happened to Gloria is wrong. Though no one speaks up immediately, the growing solidarity among the passengers creates a ripple effect that makes Karen's hostility seem out of place. But just as the tension begins to settle, Karen returns, this time with another flight attendant by her side. Gloria's stomach drops as she notices the stern look on Karen's face. She tries to steady her nerves, but the situation is quickly escalating. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Karen says, her voice cold. "But you've been causing a disturbance. We need you to come with us." Gloria's heart races as the words sink in. "A disturbance?" she asks, her voice steady despite the shock. "I haven't done anything wrong. I've just asked for a cup of water." Karen's response is swift, final, and filled with an unmistakable authority. "You've already been given a warning, and now you're disrupting the flight. You need to leave the plane." Gloria is stunned. She's done nothing wrong. She's asked for basic courtesy, and yet here she is, being accused of something she hasn't done. She looks around the cabin, her eyes meeting the gaze of a few passengers who are watching in disbelief. No one speaks up, though Gloria can see the shock in their eyes. No one moves to defend her. She feels the weight of the situation pressing down on her, and for the first time she's unsure of what to do. Karen doesn't wait for an answer. She gestures to the security officers standing at the front of the plane. Two men dressed in uniforms move toward Gloria, their steps slow but purposeful. "Ma'am, please stand up," one of the officers says, his voice firm but not unkind. "You'll need to follow us." Gloria nods, still in disbelief, her heart pounding in her chest. She gathers her belongings slowly, her hands trembling not from fear, but from the humiliation of it all. She stands, her legs feeling weak beneath her, but she forces herself to move forward, each step heavy with the weight of the unjust treatment she's receiving. As Gloria walks down the aisle, the entire cabin seems to hold its breath. The passengers are quiet now, their eyes following her, some shaking their heads, others looking away in discomfort. But the tension is palpable. Gloria offers a small, apologetic smile to those around her, but she can feel the sting of their silence. She hasn't caused any trouble, but in this moment, it feels like the weight of the world is pressing down on her. The security officers escort her off the plane, their faces unreadable. Gloria walks with as much dignity as she can muster, her head held high despite the injustice of it all. The whispers continue, but Gloria focuses on the goal she's kept in her mind the entire time, seeing her grandchildren, sharing love, and cherishing this moment with her family. And even though she's escorted from the plane, Gloria knows that this moment, this injustice, will not define her. She'll rise from it, as she always has. The world may try to tear her down, but Gloria is not so easily broken. As Gloria is escorted down the narrow aisle, her heart pounds in her chest, but she holds herself with a quiet grace. The slow, measured steps she takes are deliberate. She refuses to let her body betray the sharp sting of humiliation coursing through her. Her hands, trembling ever so slightly, are clasped together in front of her, but she keeps her back straight and her gaze forward, offering a faint, apologetic smile to the passengers who are watching her leave. But she knows the eyes of the entire cabin are on her, but she refuses to let the weight of their judgment crush her spirit. There's an eerie silence in the cabin as she moves down the aisle, the sound of the flight attendant's heels against the floor the only noise breaking the tension. The passengers around her glance uncomfortably at one another, unsure of how to react. Some avert their eyes, not wanting to get involved, while others glance back at Gloria with empathy or shock, as if they know this isn't right but don't have the courage to speak out. Karen walks briskly ahead, leading the way while the other flight attendant follows closely behind, her face expressionless. Neither of them speaks. There's an unsettling coldness in the air, a thick barrier of discomfort that seems to suffocate the space between Gloria and the rest of the passengers. The eyes of the passengers shift uncomfortably, glancing from one another to the front of the plane, unsure of what to do or say. The flight crew, who had been part of this unsettling scene, seem almost relieved that their roles are clear. Gloria is to be removed, and they've done their part. But as Gloria continues her calm walk toward the front of the plane, she notices a shift in the atmosphere. The whispers, the low murmurs of discontent that had been quiet before are now starting to grow. A man sitting near the back of the plane clears his throat and says in a low, firm voice, "This isn't right." The words are simple but carry weight, and they break the silence like a ripple in a pond. The words seem to echo throughout the cabin, and at first no one dares to speak up, but slowly others begin to follow suit. A woman in a floral dress who had been seated near the window looks at Gloria with an apologetic expression and says to no one in particular, "This is ridiculous." Another passenger, a young man in a suit, shakes his head and mutters, "She didn't do anything wrong." And just like that, the quiet murmur of dissent begins to grow louder. One voice after another, passengers begin voicing their objections, expressing disbelief at what they are witnessing. There's a rising sense of anger in the air, palpable in the way the passengers exchange looks, some of them standing up slightly as if to get a better view of the injustice unfolding before them. The cabin, once filled with tension and silence, begins to shift in a way that Gloria couldn't have anticipated. Despite the growing support from the passengers, Gloria remains calm. She doesn't look at anyone for validation. She doesn't need it. Her dignity is the only thing she has left in this moment. She knows that the passengers who are standing up for her are doing so out of kindness, out of a recognition of the injustice being done. But she also knows that this moment, her composure in the face of such cruelty, will speak louder than any words. Her chest aches, but she keeps her emotions locked inside. She's learned over the years to shield herself from the sting of prejudice, but today feels different. This isn't just about her, it's about something larger. It's about the way she's been treated, the unfairness of being made to feel as though she doesn't belong, the assumptions made about her simply because of her age and the color of her skin. The flight attendants, noticing the increasing number of passengers speaking up, seem more uncomfortable now. Karen, walking ahead of Gloria, shifts her weight uncomfortably, casting a glance back toward the passengers as they continue to voice their objections. But she doesn't respond, she just quickens her pace. The second flight attendant, who had been silent until now, glances nervously at the passengers, her face betraying a flicker of doubt, but she doesn't say a word. Gloria doesn't take her eyes off the front of the plane, her expression calm and composed, but inside, the smallest ember of hope begins to flicker. For a moment, it feels as though the passengers are not just witnessing her humiliation, but also standing up to it. The momentary surge of support feels like a collective push against the invisible barrier that's always kept people like her in the margins. This isn't just about one woman. It's about standing up for what's right, for dignity, and for the respect that every person deserves. As Gloria reaches the front of the plane, the sound of the passengers' voices begins to fade, replaced by the quiet hum of the engines. She stands tall in the face of it all, her head held high. Though the injustice she's faced weighs heavily on her heart, she knows this is not the end of her story. The passengers' growing support gives her hope, a quiet reminder that even in moments like this, change is possible. Gloria sits in the quiet corner of the terminal, the hum of the airport's bustle around her barely registering. Her hands are folded tightly in her lap as she stares down at the phone in her hand. The anger and confusion from the flight are still swirling inside her, but she knows she needs to make this call. She takes a deep breath and dials her son, Thomas. The phone rings twice before Thomas picks up, his voice calm but with an undertone of concern. "Mom, everything okay?" "No, baby." Gloria replies softly, her voice shaky. She tries to steady her emotions, but it's hard to keep the tremor from seeping through. They kicked me off the plane. Karen, the flight attendant. She treated me terribly. It wasn't right." There's a pause on the other end of the line, and Gloria can almost hear the disbelief in Thomas's silence. Then his voice rises, the shock giving way to something much deeper. "Mom, no, they didn't. They didn't kick you off for nothing, did they? Tell me exactly what happened." Gloria recounts the events as best as she can, still feeling the sting of humiliation as she relives each moment. She tells him about the water incident, how Karen had dismissed her request for a simple cup of water to take her medication. She recounts the coldness of Karen's tone, the harshness with which she'd been treated, and how it had escalated into being escorted off the plane by security. When she finishes, Thomas is silent for a moment. Gloria can almost hear the grinding of his teeth, the anger building as he processes what she's just told him. His voice, when it comes, is low but firm, filled with authority that Gloria recognizes instantly. "This is my responsibility, Mom," he says, his tone simmering with controlled fury. "Don't worry, I'll fix this. They're going to regret this. Stay right there. I'm on my way. Just stay put, okay?" Gloria's heart swells with a mix of relief and guilt. She doesn't want to burden him with this. He's already done so much for her. She knows this situation isn't something he should have to deal with, yet hearing the determination in his voice, she can't help but feel comforted by the fact that her son is going to take action. "I'm so sorry, Thomas. I didn't mean to cause you any trouble," she whispers, her voice cracking with emotion. No, don't apologize," Thomas replies, his voice gentle now, but still laced with a sharp undercurrent of anger. "You've done nothing wrong. This is their fault, and I'll make sure they know it. Just stay in the terminal. I'll handle it from here." Gloria nods even though he can't see her, feeling a sense of warmth spread through her chest. She knows that Thomas will do whatever it takes to right the wrongs done to her, even if it means confronting those in power, even if it means challenging the very system that allowed this to happen. "Just get me the details of what happened, Mom," Thomas continues. "Stay safe. I'll be there soon. No more of this nonsense." Gloria hangs up the phone, her hands still trembling but now with a sense of resolve. She knows that her son's protective instinct is coming into play, and while she may feel ashamed for what has transpired, she also knows he's right. She's done nothing wrong. The way she was treated, the assumptions made about her, those were not her fault. They were a reflection of the ugliness that still exists in the world. As she waits for Thomas to arrive, Gloria sits back in the chair, her mind swirling. She knows this incident isn't just about one flight attendant's cruelty. It's about a much deeper issue. She's been judged by her appearance, assumed to be less than others, as though her worth could be measured by superficial standards. But this is something she won't let slide. Thomas is going to fix this, but Gloria knows that the problem isn't just the individual flight attendants. It's systemic. It's a pattern of behavior that goes beyond one interaction. And though she doesn't yet know how, she's determined to make sure it doesn't end here. The wheels are already in motion, and this is only the beginning of the change that needs to come. Karen walks up and down the aisle, her steps purposeful and full of arrogance, convinced that she has put an end to the situation. She doesn't notice the tension lingering in the cabin, nor does she care. In her mind, she's done the right thing. Gloria had caused a disturbance and needed to be removed. It's simple in her head. The passengers who spoke out, they'll get over it. She believes she's in control now, maintaining order, her actions justified. Karen doesn't feel the eyes following her, the silent judgment of the passengers who have begun to make their own decisions about what they've witnessed. She's too focused on her task at hand, preparing the plane for takeoff, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing behind her. What she doesn't know is that a few of the passengers who witnessed Gloria's mistreatment have already started recording the incident, their phones capturing every moment of her dismissive behavior. By the time Karen reaches the cockpit to finalize preparations, the video of her treatment of Gloria is already being shared online. The backlash begins almost immediately. Social media erupts with comments of outrage, posts of support for Gloria, and condemnation of Karen's actions. The video spreads like wildfire, catching the attention of not only fellow passengers but also journalists, activists, and organizations advocating for racial equality. They see this as a clear instance of systemic prejudice, an example of how people like Gloria are treated based on assumptions and stereotypes. The anger and the demand for accountability grow louder by the minute. Karen has no idea that the situation she thought she had under control is quickly turning into a public scandal. As the plane moves closer to takeoff, the captain receives the flood of complaints and video evidence. He understands the gravity of the situation. A quiet urgency builds in the cockpit. Karen's confidence wavers as she prepares to face the consequences of her actions, but she still believes she's done nothing wrong. She doesn't see the magnitude of her mistake. Yet, the moment Karen reaches the front of the plane, she feels a slight shift in the air. The passengers' eyes are no longer just watching her, they are scrutinizing her. She walks past them with a renewed sense of self-assurance, thinking she can dismiss them just as she did Gloria. However, the captain's voice breaks her train of thought. "Karen," he calls from the cockpit, his tone stern and cold. She stops abruptly, the smugness fading from her face as she hears the unmistakable seriousness in his voice. "Come to the front, please," the captain orders, his words measured but unyielding. As Karen approaches the cockpit, the door opens, and two airport security officers step forward. They stand with their arms crossed, their posture firm and professional. "Please come with us," one of the officers says, his voice even, though there's an undercurrent of finality in his tone. Karen freezes, the words settling in her stomach like a rock. She can't process it at first, her mind struggling to grasp the reality of the situation. The weight of the moment crashes over her as she realizes her actions have consequences far beyond what she imagined. Her overconfidence in thinking she could control the situation falters. She begins to understand that the actions she took, the assumptions she made, and the humiliation she caused have not only stirred the passengers but ignited a firestorm of public backlash. The support for Gloria and the outcry against her behavior is more powerful than Karen ever anticipated. She stands motionless for a moment, the realization dawning on her. She is no longer in control. And this time, the consequences are coming for her. Gloria's heart is still heavy as she sits in the terminal, trying to maintain her composure. Her phone call to her son Thomas had been filled with a quiet resolve, but now as she waits, the gravity of what happened on the plane sinks in. She had endured her entire life learning to rise above the stares, the whispers, the dismissals, and yet, in this moment, she finds herself facing an injustice so blatant it's hard to ignore. But Gloria's strength isn't just in her ability to endure. It's in her unwavering commitment to handling every situation with grace. Her son, Thomas, on the other hand, has always been a man of action. As soon as Gloria's call ended, he quickly mobilized. He knew his mother would never want him to make a scene, but this wasn't just about her. It was about standing up for what was right. He was a man of power, a successful CEO in the airline industry, and he knew exactly how to wield it. Thomas's anger is simmering, but it's the controlled kind of anger, the kind that comes with years of experience in leadership, where every decision is calculated, every move intentional. As soon as he hangs up with his mother, he makes the first call to the airline's operations department. His voice is calm, but there's an undeniable edge to it that commands respect. "Linda," he begins, his tone unmistakably firm, "I need you to listen closely. You don't know who she is, do you?" "That's my mother." There's a long pause at the other end of the line. Linda, the operations manager, had been part of the team that dealt with the aftermath of the incident, but she hadn't known the full details yet. She didn't know that the woman they'd just unceremoniously removed from the plane was Thomas's mother, a woman whose name carried weight in both the business and philanthropic communities. The shock in Linda's voice is palpable when she speaks next. "Wait, what? She's your mother?" she stammers, her words laced with disbelief. "Yes," Thomas responds, his voice controlled but with a quiet, simmering anger. "You better start reviewing the flight records and the footage from that incident, now." The realization of the gravity of the situation begins to hit Linda. She's been managing operations for years, but the thought of mishandling a situation with someone so high profile, someone who clearly had the power to take down a corporation if wronged, is a wake-up call. She hurriedly begins to pull up the necessary records and footage, her hands trembling slightly as she reviews the files on her screen. In the few moments before Linda begins her frantic review, Thomas takes a steadying breath. This wasn't just about his mother anymore. This was about systemic issues within the airline, issues that had been allowed to fester for far too long. The small, seemingly insignificant incident that started with his mother's mistreatment was a ripple in a much larger pond, and Thomas wasn't going to let it slide. While Linda scrambles to pull up the necessary footage, Thomas wastes no time moving on to the next steps. He picks up the phone to call his legal team. As the CEO of the airline, he knows that this moment is critical and the company's reputation is on the line. He also knows that the public reaction will be swift and unforgiving. He can already imagine the backlash, the headlines that will surely explode once the truth comes out. It's a mess, and he's determined to clean it up fast. "Do whatever it takes," he tells the legal team, his voice stern. "Karen needs to be fired. She's made a mockery of customer service, and I won't tolerate that kind of behavior in my company." The legal team agrees, immediately launching an internal investigation. But Thomas knows that firing Karen won't be enough. This wasn't just about one bad employee. It was about a cultural shift that needed to happen across the entire airline. He's seen the way the staff operates, the way certain biases have slipped through the cracks. His company had prided itself on customer service, but this incident had revealed how much work was left to do. Re-education on customer service and cultural sensitivity, he says, almost to himself. "We can't let this go. This incident needs to spark a movement for change, not just within our airline, but across the entire industry." As Thomas speaks, he feels the weight of what's ahead. Gloria, his mother, had always been the quiet force in his life. She had raised him with a sense of humility, of knowing when to speak and when to act, but above all, she had instilled in him a deep belief in justice and respect. She had never wanted to use her family's name to gain favor, never sought the limelight. But in this moment, Thomas realizes that what happened to her is bigger than just her. It's about making sure no one else, especially not someone like her, has to endure this kind of treatment again. "Let's make sure this never happens again," Thomas says, his voice determined. "Get to work and make it clear that things are going to change." He knows this is the turning point. Gloria may have wanted to remain in the background, but now she's part of something much larger than herself. A movement that will reshape how this airline and, perhaps, the entire travel industry views its customers, especially those who are too often overlooked or dismissed. It's no longer just about a wrongful removal from a flight. It's about making sure that people like Gloria, people of all races and ages, are treated with the respect they deserve no matter where they sit on a plane or how old they are. Gloria may have been silenced for a moment, but now her story is a catalyst for change, and it's a change that will be felt far beyond this flight. Karen walks down the aisle, her steps as confident as ever. She still feels a sense of satisfaction bubbling inside her, convinced she has done the right thing by removing Gloria from the plane. She believes that everything is under control, that she's managed to handle a problem passenger, keeping the flight smooth and running on schedule. But as she passes the rows of passengers, she notices an uncomfortable stillness in the air. The murmurs have died down, but something is different. Something is off. Suddenly, the intercom crackles and the captain's voice fills the cabin. "Flight attendant Karen Mallister, please report to the front of the plane. I repeat, Karen Mallister, please report to the front of the plane." The command is sharp and direct, and it catches Karen off guard. Her stomach drops, the sense of unease she's been trying to ignore suddenly becoming palpable. She stops mid-step, her confidence faltering for the first time. She knows this isn't a routine call. Something is wrong. As she makes her way to the front of the plane, her mind races. Was there an issue with the passengers who complained? Did they report her behavior to someone higher up? She dismisses the thoughts quickly. She's been doing this job for years. She's untouchable. But as she reaches the front of the plane, her eyes lock onto two security officers standing next to the captain. "Karen Mallister, you are being removed from this flight," one of the officers says, his voice low but unwavering. The words hit Karen like a punch to the gut, and she freezes, unable to fully comprehend what's happening. Before she can protest, Thomas's voice cuts through the tension in the air. "Karen, you humiliated my mother," he says firmly, his voice cold but seething with anger, "and you'll answer for it." Karen blinks, her face paling. She looks at Thomas, the realization slowly sinking in. She had no idea who Gloria was. No idea the woman she'd dismissed so casually was the mother of one of the most powerful men in the industry. But it doesn't matter now. The damage is done, and it's irreversible. Mr. Jennings, Karen stammers, trying to regain her composure. "I didn't know it was your mother, please. I didn't mean for things to escalate this way. I was just doing my job." Thomas's gaze hardens. "You didn't do your job, Karen. You let your bias take over. You humiliated her, and I won't stand for that in my company." Karen opens her mouth to speak again, but the officer steps forward. "We have already been instructed to escort you off the plane. Your services are no longer required by this airline." Karen feels her heart race. Her palms begin to sweat. She stumbles backward, her mind struggling to catch up with the gravity of the situation. She had never expected anything like this to happen. In her mind, she had been justified, disciplining a passenger who was causing trouble, treating someone like Gloria the way she thought they deserved. But now, with the cold reality of the consequences hitting her, she realizes that her arrogance, her assumptions about Gloria, and her dismissal of the passengers' voices have led her to this moment. "I didn't mean to cause this much trouble," she protests weakly, her voice barely a whisper. The humiliation is overwhelming, but it's too late for apologies. The officers begin to move toward her, gently but firmly guiding her away from the front of the plane. The cabin remains deathly silent, all eyes on Karen as she is escorted off. It's not just the passengers' disapproval she feels now. It's the weight of everything she's lost in an instant. As the plane prepares to take off, the silence remains. But it isn't the same as before. The oppressive tension has lifted, replaced by a quiet sense of justice in the air. Passengers glance at each other, exchanging looks that speak volumes. Some of relief, others of quiet approval. The mood has shifted. Moments later, an announcement comes through the intercom, this time from the captain. "We would like to apologize for the unfortunate incident that occurred earlier in the flight. We acknowledge the wrong done to one of our passengers, Ms. Gloria Jennings, and we are taking immediate action to ensure that this type of behavior does not happen again. Ms. Jennings, we deeply regret the treatment you received, and we are making sure that all necessary steps are being taken to address this issue." The captain's voice is steady, but the message is clear. Karen's actions will not go unpunished. The statement lands heavy in the cabin, and even though some passengers remain silent, others nod with approval. The airline has made its stance clear. The apology, although not directly to the passengers, is meant to show that the company values respect and fairness above all else. The news quickly spreads, and within hours, the airline releases an official statement addressing the incident. The statement not only confirms that Karen has been fired, but also announces a comprehensive review of customer service protocols and cultural sensitivity training for all employees. It's a bold move, one that signals the company's commitment to a future where no passenger, regardless of race or background, will face such discrimination again. Gloria's story, once a small incident that could have been brushed under the rug, becomes a catalyst for change. And though Karen's career is over, the ripple effect of her actions will have far-reaching consequences, sparking a much-needed conversation about bias, race, and respect within the airline industry and beyond. Gloria sat in the quiet of the terminal, her bags neatly beside her as she awaited her rebooking. She had just been humiliated, escorted off the plane by security for no reason other than the assumptions made about her. But as the minutes passed, her thoughts began to shift. The anger that had once flared up inside her began to cool, replaced by something stronger: resolve. Gloria knew she couldn't let this moment slide into the shadows, as so many others before it had. She had to make this count, not just for herself, but for every person who had ever faced the same kind of unjust treatment. When her son Thomas arrived at the terminal, he was clearly upset. He had been furious after hearing the details of what had transpired, but seeing his mother now, calm and composed, seemed to bring a sense of peace to him. He made sure to have her rebooked on the next flight, this time in first class, as a sign of goodwill. "Mom, I'm so sorry for what happened," he said, his voice full of regret. "I promise you this won't go unaddressed." Gloria smiled softly at her son, grateful for his support. "I know, Thomas, but it's not just about being treated right this time. I want more than an apology. I want to be part of the solution." Thomas blinked, taken aback by her words. "What do you mean?" "I want a stake in this company," she said, her voice firm. "I want to be part of the change, not just a passive bystander." It took Thomas a moment to process what she was asking. His initial shock gave way to understanding. He knew that his mother had always been a woman of integrity, someone who led by example. But this was a new level. "You want to be a shareholder?" Thomas asked, his voice tinged with disbelief but also admiration. Gloria nodded. "I'm not asking for a seat at the table just to sit there, Thomas. I want to use my influence to make real change. I want to ensure this kind of behavior, this discrimination, never happens again. Not just for me, but for everyone." Thomas considered her words carefully. He knew this wasn't just an emotional response. It was Gloria's way of making sure her legacy lived on in a way that would make a tangible difference. He took a deep breath and nodded. "You're right. Let's make it happen." That afternoon, Gloria became a primary shareholder in the airline. The news of her decision spread quickly through the company. It wasn't just a financial shift, it was a cultural one. Gloria's presence at the board meetings, her strong and calm influence, quickly became a powerful force for change within the airline. The impact of Gloria's decision was immediate and powerful. As a prominent shareholder, she began advocating for major changes within the airline, starting with mandatory inclusivity and cultural sensitivity training for all employees. It was clear that there were issues deep within the company's culture that needed to be addressed, issues that had allowed Karen's behavior to thrive unchecked. Gloria pushed for diversity in hiring, not just at the entry-level positions, but at all levels of the company. She believed that the airline could only be truly great if its workforce reflected the world it served. Her voice became a beacon of change, and slowly but surely the airline began to shift its priorities. Passengers who had been treated unfairly, who had felt overlooked or disregarded, began to notice the difference. Gloria wasn't just making decisions from behind the scenes. She was actively working to transform the culture from the inside out. Gloria had never sought fame or recognition, but now, as a leader in the company, she had an opportunity to ensure that no one else would be humiliated or dismissed in the way she had been. Her resolve, her quiet power, was reshaping not just the airline, but the very fabric of how the airline industry viewed its passengers. Through her actions, she was teaching the world that respect wasn't a privilege, it was a right, and she was leading the way in making that belief a reality. As Gloria's story began to spread, the public response was nothing short of overwhelming. The viral sensation was not simply because of the incident itself, but because of how Gloria handled it. Her composure in the face of cruelty, the quiet dignity with which she carried herself, even as she was wronged. People everywhere began to rally behind her, demanding justice. The hashtag #JusticeForGloria began trending worldwide within hours. Social media exploded with support as people from all walks of life expressed their outrage over the mistreatment of the elderly woman, while also celebrating her calm strength. News outlets around the world picked up the story, their headlines calling Gloria a symbol of resilience and a beacon of dignity in a world plagued by prejudice. Some focused on the remarkable way she had responded to being humiliated, showing the power of grace and poise in the face of adversity. Others honed in on the corporate side of the story, particularly praising Thomas's swift action in removing Karen from her post and addressing the systemic issues within the airline. His leadership, combined with the airline's public apology, was hailed as a rare example of corporate responsibility in the face of a crisis. In the midst of all this, Gloria remained humble. She hadn't sought to become the face of a movement, but now she was thrust into the spotlight as an advocate for change, an advocate for every person who had been treated unfairly because of the color of their skin, their age, or their social status. She received countless messages from people all over the world, some thanking her for speaking out, others sharing their own stories of discrimination, and still others expressing how her strength had inspired them to stand up for themselves. Gloria's calm demeanor, her refusal to let her dignity be diminished, became a rallying cry for the public. People began to see her not just as a victim of injustice, but as a catalyst for change. The viral nature of her story encouraged many to reflect on their own actions and biases, forcing companies and institutions across the globe to take a hard look at their internal cultures and the way they treated their customers. It wasn't just about one flight attendant's actions. It was about the larger issue of systemic bias that many had turned a blind eye to for far too long. For Karen, however, the aftermath was far more brutal. At first, she hadn't fully grasped the gravity of her actions. She thought she was just doing her job, controlling the situation, managing the problem passenger. But the media storm that followed Gloria's removal from the plane quickly revealed the magnitude of her mistake. Karen's social media accounts were flooded with angry comments and messages, some from people she didn't even know, accusing her of racism and cruelty. The more people shared their own stories of discrimination, the more her name became synonymous with prejudice. Her professional life began to unravel almost instantly. Once she had prided herself on her career, confident that her experience and dedication would ensure her a long tenure in the airline industry. But now all of that was in jeopardy. She became the subject of ridicule across the internet, and soon she found that her name was being blacklisted from every airline job she applied for. Her professional network, once solid and dependable, began to evaporate, and those who had once supported her now distanced themselves. The videos of her harsh treatment of Gloria had gone viral, and many of them were being shared with captions like, "This is how we treat our elders," and "This is the face of discrimination in the workplace." The more she tried to defend her actions, the worse it became for her. Karen attempted to explain that she was just doing her job, but that only fueled the outrage. Her attempts at damage control were met with even more disdain, as the public saw through her excuses. Eventually, Karen's reputation became irreparably tarnished. She had become a symbol of the very behavior she had tried to justify, an example of someone who thought they could wield their power over others, unaware of the consequences that came with their actions. Her name, once a regular feature in the airline industry, was now synonymous with bigotry. The company that had employed her was forced to disassociate from her publicly, and even as she tried to find work in other industries, her reputation preceded her. Where once Karen had been an ambitious flight attendant, now she found herself struggling to land any job at all. Her name was attached to the scandal, and the public backlash continued to haunt her. She had underestimated the strength of the public's outrage and the power of social media to hold people accountable. What had been a routine flight for her, a day of enforcing rules in her mind, had turned into a career-ending debacle. On the other hand, Gloria's name continued to rise. Her calm, unwavering strength in the face of adversity had made her a hero in the eyes of many. She had shown the world that resilience could stand tall against cruelty, and now her influence was being felt not only in the airline industry but across corporate America. Her story was a lesson in how to handle injustice with grace, and it was a reminder that even in the face of systemic racism, one person could spark change. While Karen's career and reputation lay in ruins, Gloria's had been elevated to new heights. She wasn't just a passenger on a flight anymore. She was a leader, a symbol of the fight against discrimination, and a powerful advocate for those who had been wronged. Her story had not only changed the course of her own life, but had started a ripple effect, urging people to question the systems that allowed such injustices to happen and inspiring them to act. Gloria had used her voice, her story, and her dignity to take control and shape a new future, one where equality and respect were no longer optional. As the story of Gloria's courage and strength continues to resonate with people worldwide, her actions serve as a powerful reminder of the importance of standing up for what is right, even in the face of adversity. Gloria's decision to take control of the situation and become a shareholder in her son's airline marked the beginning of a much-needed shift in how people are treated, both in the airline industry and beyond. It was a lesson in how one person's quiet strength and resolve can change the course of not only their own life, but the lives of others as well. Gloria had always believed that dignity was something that came from within, that it wasn't dependent on how others treated you, but rather on how you carried yourself, no matter the circumstances. Her actions proved that resilience could not only withstand injustice, but could turn it into a force for change. By taking control, she not only reclaimed her dignity, but also ensured that others would never have to face the same kind of treatment she had endured. What do you think about Gloria's decision to take control and become a shareholder in her son's airline? Do you believe the story would have turned out differently if it wasn't for her calm demeanor and the support of other passengers? How can we ensure such injustices don't happen again? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The story concludes with Gloria's reflection on the impact of her actions. Dignity isn't about how others treat you. It's how you carry yourself, no matter the challenges. This is just the beginning. We all have a responsibility to stand up for what's right. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories of courage and change. Together, we can create a world where everyone's dignity is recognized and respected.